Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to a special 5-part series on the evolving role of risk, compliance, and ethics. This series is sponsored by SAI Global. SAI Global has developed a new service offering, Ethics Anywhere. Ethics Anywhere is a modern approach to learning. It is responsive on any device, customizable for any organization, and targeted to any user, available in any location and translated in any language. So your employees can consume content at any time and prepare for any risk. And you can collect data to measure any goal your ethics and compliance program may have. For more information on Ethics Anywhere, check out our sponsor's website, saiglobal.com. That's saiglobal.com. In this episode 2, I visit with Rebecca Turco. Rebecca is the Vice President of Learning Solutions at SAI Global, and in this podcast, we have a very interesting exploration of the changing compliance mindset. This 5-part series on the evolving role of risk, compliance, and ethics is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I am back for another episode in our 5-part series on the evolving role of risk, compliance, and ethics in protecting brand and reputation. Today, I have with me SAI Global Vice President of Learning Solutions, Rebecca Turco. Rebecca, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you for having me.
So, Rebecca, in this episode, we are going to take a look at your experiences and your takeaways. One of the things that has intrigued me is the changes and evolution of the compliance space, the ethics and compliance industry, from the regulators to the $15 million company that may be selling products overseas and everything in between. So I wanted to ask you, what key takeaways have you seen in your experience over the past 5 years?
Yeah, I think that we are in a very different place than we were 5 years ago. The market's showing us that we're no longer about just providing compliance content and checking the box. The whole entire idea, compliance is now part of the culture of a company. The trends that we're seeing really are around how are companies embedding compliance and culture in their organization? What are they doing to change behavior? Look at the analytics to talk about effectiveness of training. We've seen a lot of shift from 30 to 40 minutes of training. Targeted, people are looking for targeted pieces of content. They want to be able to make sure their employees are valued in terms of the time they're spending on that training. They clearly want to measure effectiveness to show that the program's working or to show risk areas that are maybe a problem for companies. The content has to be engaging and tied to business outcomes. These are the trends that I've seen. We're moving away from kind of boring pieces of content that cover broad risk areas that kind of give you a level of security, or you think you have a level of security, really moving into meaningful pieces of content, understanding where people's risks are in the business practices that they work in today, understanding their roles, understanding, how risk presents to them in that role. So I think the trends I'm seeing really are around kind of getting more focused, more targeted, and less around a kind of a blanket that covers me from an anti-bribery or, a risk area. So that's what I'm seeing. Are you seeing similar things, or have you come across other trends?
You really said a lot in there. So let me unpack that a little bit, because you actually started with the regulators, with the Department of Justice. And you mentioned specifically the Department of Justice mandating that compliance program training had to be effective. But it's not just it has to be effective. You, as the company, you have to demonstrate effectiveness. So we have the government talking about effective training. I heard you talk about making training more engaging. And from the service provider perspective, I think that's something that people like yourself have really worked at, to get away from rote training, either by PowerPoint or by death by Xerox copy, to something that people are going to be engaged in. And then I heard you talk about your clients, the customers, the companies, They actually want more focused and targeted training for the risks that people are engaging, or rather the risks people have out in the real world. So you really, I thought, really spoke to the spectrum of the players in the compliance space and how everyone has a specific role, even as tactically or down into the weeds as much as training. So I wondered if you might be able to talk about all three of those and how you've seen that evolution, starting with when the department talked about effective training in the 2017 evaluation. That was really the first time they had said in a policy statement that they wanted to see not only you have effective training, but how do you measure that? How does someone like yourself take that information and incorporate that into your working with clients?
It's a great question. I think there's a couple pieces here. Effectiveness, as you said, they came out in 2017 and said it's no longer checking the box. You have to do more. Learning, and I come from a learning background, is the key to any learning objective is being able to understand its concepts, understand how it applies to you, and then it's daily repetition or weekly, monthly repetition. It's not a one and done. So when we think about effectiveness for, our solution is, of course, you're going to have a high level offering that talks about kind of, risks in the business. You have to, meet your regulation from the regulators, but also, and the learner needs to understand what it means to them. And it's not the first time they take the course. That does not mean that they're, able to make the best business decisions when presented with scenarios. Scenarios of working environments are complex. So we look at it in a way that says they need to understand what the risk is. They need to understand what to do if presented with that risk, right? Where to go, how to report if necessary. And then they also over time need to understand how that risk presents itself in their job. So a finance risk versus a sales risk are two different risks for an organization. So we look at effectiveness as saying you have to train them. You have to follow up with some type of reminder about that training, right? Or about that business risk. You have to infuse it in your manager conversations, in your CEO messages. You have to start to have this culture of compliance, this community within your business that says compliance isn't a one-stop event. It's over time. And that is how you start to get to the behavior change. So we look at effectiveness to say, everything that we give you, whether it's an assessment in a course, whether it's a standalone, knowledge check, whether it's a question that asks, what do you think? Give me what you think about this scenario. Do you think there's risk? The value in grabbing those analytics and that data to then be able to start to measure where people are, where people really feel, what they think, what they understand. You start to drive your kind of roadmap for your compliance program year after year. Every year you'll say you're going to run a certain amount of courses and you just do it because you didn't do it last year or because the media says you have to do it, right? Because there's a movement. We look at saying, let's take the data, let's understand where your learners are, and let's help them along that journey. And it doesn't mean that everyone gets the same training. It means that we are going to make sure that we're helping you teach that employee what they need to know, understand how those risks present themselves, and then continue to train and remind them of how that may come up in their daily job and life. So it's measurement over time with effective questioning, right, and effective content.
So one of the things or challenges that I assume you would have had to deal with in your learning, in your career in the learning industry, is the topic of engagement. And how do you engage employees? And we've seen training go from literally, PowerPoints to gamification to very interactive, very active. What do you see, or what's the role of a company like SAI Global in that engagement piece? How do you work to make training engaging for those sitting in the chairs or at the tables listening?
I think it's an ongoing process. I think that the industry is looking for ways, to your point earlier, to get away from the PowerPoint, the kind of boring slideshow, and really think about what is engagement, what is gamification, what does that mean in a compliance context? I think of it, SAI thinks of it as two ways: personalization. If the learner feels that the program's been personalized to them, whether it's asking questions up front about their role or questions about their, where they work or who they manage, there's an immediate interaction before I get a piece of content, right? So I'm immediately curious when I answer these questions, what the content is going to be behind this. So this idea of personalizing it for the learner, making the learner actively interact with this, starts kind of giving the learner a perspective that's different than here's a course that everyone's taking. And then when you think about gamification, you think about, what are the elements that you can bring in there? For me, that comes in a couple ways, right? It comes in the way of making pieces of content that are shorter, that have, using modern design elements, right? When you think about video or, media pieces, assessments and knowledge checks that give you points, right? Building this kind of idea that there's a point or reward. If you get all these assessments right, you don't have to take the compliance training. You've already shown us competency here. You get to go right to the certification, right? So these are the ideas of how do I engage the employee. And I think that also comes down to those, when we talk about scenarios or, the risks is making those meaningful. It's making sure that, everything that you're putting in front of your employee looks like your brand. It looks like the office that they work in or their colleagues that they sit next to or the clients that they go and see. That is really important to making it meaningful and making it to the point where people feel that it's, personalized and engaging. It's not something off the shelf, right? That just every company is using. This was meant for me. This is meant for my company, for my job. And, for me to be able to make sure that I'm adhering to our rules as an organization.
Rebecca, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time, but I've been visiting today with Rebecca Turco, the Vice President of Learning Solutions at SAI Global. We've been looking back really at what Rebecca has seen over the past 5 years, specifically in the area of compliance training and solutions. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow when we talk about Ethics Anywhere. Rebecca, thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode in our 5-part series, The Evolving Role of Risk, Compliance, and Ethics, sponsored by SAI Global. This 5-part series is a special production of the Compliance Podcast Network.